just came out west to be a cowboy.
Well, I was born in a little town called Thatcher, which is out in the middle of nowhere between La Junta and Trinidad. My dad was with the railroad, and it was a railroad stop, and we were all born at home. So I was born in Trinidad, but grew up actually in Buena Vista. In 7th grade, I read a magazine article that was about lawyers and law schools. And it was the first time the light bulb sort of went on upstairs in my head. I said, oh, I could do that. I love arguing with people.
I was working in a counseling capacity, placement education with young people in Denver with a program that was sponsored by the YMCA. And some of my work took me to the court system, the juvenile court system. And I found it absolutely fascinating.
The journey started in 4th grade. I was born and raised in Hawaii, and my dad was an attorney. He raised me and my sisters, there's no boys in the family, really more like his sons. And I can remember distinctly when I was 9 years old, my dad saying, you're going to go to law school. I mean, there was just no doubt in his mind. And that, to me, was pretty revolutionary for that time. That was, you know, in the early 60s. This was before the days of women's lib.
But anyway, Zita came and was our guest to speak about what it was like to be the first in the class, the first class of women at Harvard. And somehow at the end of the evening, I was very, very excited about her speech and so forth. And I sort of said to my husband, you know, I'm going nuts at home. I think this would be something I would love to do.
The women attorneys came from very diverse backgrounds, but larger patterns are beginning to emerge. For instance, the common experience of women who came of age in the 1940s was very different from what women experienced in the 50s and 60s, and that in turn is different from the 70s and 80s. Nowhere are these differences more sharply drawn than in the experience of law school.
My first day of law school at USC, I was so excited. I got down there at 7 in the morning just to stand outside and look and say, I am here. I am here.
There were about, I think, 8 of us, ladies, girls, and they had no idea how to prepare for women. They'd only had men there. For one thing, they put in a brand new bathroom for us, which was all pink. It was so glaring, you just almost had to put your hand over your eyes to enter it. And the men were stuck with their 1900 bathrooms.
And there were 2 women, I can remember 3 women, counting myself, and 2 of us survived. Actually, the society and the law school was much more concerned about the war and what was happening to it than they were about women in law school.
The professor looked out and he saw me, and at that time we had one other woman, and he said, you may have heard that I do not like women, and that's true, and I particularly do not like them in law school. And he never called on either one of us the whole semester. I'm not bragging, but there's a point to the story. On the final exam, he gave me the highest grade he had given in 25 years. And people used to say, some of the fellows, Brooke, doesn't it bother you? In fact, he never called it. I said, no, I don't feel discriminated against. If he hadn't given me the grade I earned, that's discrimination.
We started out with 12. We ended up with 6 out of almost 500. Not too many women.
When I went to law school in 1961, there were like 15 women in the class of 500. And they made it very clear they didn't want us there. The professors made it very clear we weren't wanted there. It was the first time I had really encountered that. I'd always gone to public education and never thought of myself different, so it's probably the first time I hit it. But it was probably the best practice ever for Congress, because when I got to Congress, it was about the same type of thing. You know, there's just a handful of women And it was like, why are you here?
Dean Griswold's wife always had a reception for the women, and this was sort of his speech for the women. All of you will get married and have babies, and you won't use your Harvard educations, and you're taking the place of well-qualified men.
I remember going to my seats in 2 out of my 3 classes on the first day, and the young men standing up and saying, we're having our seats changed. We've never sat next to a girl in our entire life.
Some of the professors were very congenial and sympathetic, and some were just absolutely nasty.
I didn't find it very pleasant.
Those were in the days when some professors refused to call on women in law school and actually would have what they called Ladies' Day. That would be one day a year where they would only call on women, and of course it was a big joke, and the questions they asked were considered to be not serious questions.
Well, there were 16 women, I think, in my class of 550. According to one of the very first professor we had, he wouldn't call on any of the women, and we weren't to volunteer. So you were barely tolerated at that point.
There were 3 women in my class in law school. The other 2 disappeared into thin air. I was the only woman. In most of my classes, I was called on every single day of my law school experience, every day.
And of those 15 women, I think by the time we graduated, there were only 9 or 10 of us, because the rest of the women dropped out.
Bert Brody, who teaches contracts still up there, I remember calling a handful of us who were all taking criminal law, calling us in and saying, you know, you all will never be able to say penis in open court. And I thought, you know, I'm not sure Mary Hoagland could say penis in open court. I could say it now, but back there I wasn't sure that he wasn't damn right about it.
Law school is generally, I believe, unpleasant for most people. I have met people that say that it was a wonderful experience for them, but it was absolutely pure hell for me. Out of a class of 150, there were 3 African Americans. I was the only female, and it was just plain difficult. One of the things that I can tell you about it, though, law school gave me an opportunity to learn how to operate in an adversarial situation. And for that, I am thankful and grateful to see you.
And there was no organization of women, which I think has made a lot of difference for women. I didn't know, I mean, I knew some of the women, of course, but we didn't sort of feel that we were in it together and that we had a unique perspective about being in it. We were very isolated. I think that was true for women in general in the law at that point in time.
The women are there, the women are going to be smart, the women always do well, you know, the women are usually 1 or 2 in the class, but the women don't count. We had no numbers.
I was really on the cusp of, it was, by today's standards, it wasn't very many women, but it was kind of the first small wave of women who were, who came into the legal profession. And it started when I was in law school. I was one of the founders of the Women's Law Caucus at DU Law School, and we proposed a course be offered on women in the law, and it was very controversial.
My class was the first year that there was a substantial number of women. It was sort of, you know, the wave was, it was the first part of the wave. I think we had a quarter or a third, and that was the first year that there were that many women.
In my law school class total, well, our class is about 600, and I would say probably about 150 of them were women. Latina women in my class were only 3. It was me, a woman from Texas, and a woman from California.
I'm one of these people that generally, I think, have really good memories of law school.
I think the most wonderful thing about Harvard was the student body. I mean, it was just wonderful to have the diversity that they had. There was a big difference, though, in how the Latino men treated the Latino women. There was still a lot of chauvinism at the time.
We were working our way up then. I think it was maybe 35 or 40%, so it wasn't, you know, we weren't totally in the minority. But it was very pleasant. You know, it was collegial.
And believe me, the legal profession is one where you have to have tough skin, thick skin, and have a mindset in order to succeed that you are not going to be deterred. And that was something that, I guess, being raised as a sharecropper, that, you know, I was determined. I was not going to go back to the fields.
The practice of law then was a gentleman and ladies. It wasn't ladies, really. The ladies were kind of clients mostly. But in that firm, if we witnessed a will, then afterwards Colonel Coulson would pour sherry all around. And we would, I mean, those who witnessed the will and executed the will had a lovely little glass of sherry, and we listened to some of the Colonel's best stories before the clients were sort of dismissed. I mean, it was a different kind of a practice, but it was a fascinating experience to be in that big law firm. But it taught me that that was not the place for me.
And I opened for practice. I had gotten a little office. Nobody wanted a woman lawyer. Forget it. 1946. I rented a little office, bought my desk, bought my sign, my stationery.
And his secretary came up with the idea that maybe Patty'd come in the office and do the books half day a week. So I said, certainly, I'd love to do that. It'd be great from washing dishes and scrubbing floors and stuff like that.
I said, you can't go back to Denver and leave me with all these children. At that time, I only had 8.
And then I saw him turning away tax work, because he hated tax work. And I thought, gee whiz, I can do that.
And so I was the only person in Weld County that understood bankruptcy.
I had one hung jury, and I never lost a jury trial. But I always qualified that by saying I've appeared before judges in the state who were not as wise as juries.
And I was really very lucky. It sounds like it would be a terrible burden to be the only woman lawyer in town. It was and it wasn't. There were some people who thought, you know, I was probably communist or something. But then there were other people, they all remembered me because I was the only one. And I would get mail, lady lawyer, Pueblo, Colorado, and it would be delivered.
Initially, I was a shock to them. They were standoffish. They didn't quite want me with them. But when they found out that this was not a hobby with me, that my word was good, that I played fair, they couldn't have been nicer to me. I was almost always an officer in our local bar. They were my friends.
And I did have a tremendous number of women clients. Mr. Shessel told me when I started, he said, you know, you have a great advantage as a lawyer because how many women are there and how many men and how many women would rather go to a woman. They may not know it, but they would. He said, I had to join the men's garden club to get clients, but you're already in a great club.
I very early knew that I couldn't get a job with the law firm.
So it became very clear that working for a private firm was not going to be an option for me.
But I think most of my classmates found law school to be unnerving enough in the sense that if you're told right off the bat you're barely being tolerated here, when you do get a job and you know you're not eligible to be hired for most jobs because, for example, people looking for law clerks, judges looking for law clerks, most of them had never hired a woman at that point. So you're not going to get any of those jobs. And when you did find something, you held on to it.
When I was at the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., and I saw the FBI, I thought, well, I can't find a job. I think I'll become an FBI agent, and I knew you had to be a lawyer. So I went in and said, I'd like an application to be an FBI agent, and they laughed at me.
Government was basically the place that women went for employment when I started law school.
There was a class action lawsuit filed. I was the named plaintiff. I was about to go to work for the Denver Public Defender's Office. Raleigh Rogers was the head of it, and the lawsuit was filed. I was canned by the public defenders 2 days before I was supposed to begin work there.